So this past weekend, my parents came to visit me in Halifax. They flew up from Ontario, and I was really excited to show them the town where I live now, the city where I live, and I don't know if you recognize that guy in the middle there. I traded in my mountain man, just crawled out of a cave look for something a little bit more refined. People keep asking me, like, did your mom tell you you had to shave your beard? I'll just leave that to your imagination. But yeah, I was really excited to show them around Halifax, and it was great for them to come up. But then, of course, we got hit by the snowstorm shortly after they landed, which is okay. Even though we got snowed in at the place where we were staying, they got to spend some good quality time with, dare I say, their favorite son. And we had a great time, but the roads were crazy. And I was driving in to take them here to Mass so they could see what St. Benedict was like. And we actually had to get out and push at a certain point to get up a hill. So Mom's in the front driving, and Dad and I are behind trying to push us up a hill. And we got here all right, but the roads were brutal. The snow was blowing. And when I was driving back from church, again, just trying to keep my car on the road with the whole flow of traffic, I look out the window and I saw something that made my heart just break. There was a man who was homeless and was panhandling on the side of the road. And he had his arms wrapped around an electrical pole just to keep himself from getting blown away. And he's just gripping onto this for dear life. And the look on his face, again, I just saw him for an instant as I was driving by. The look on his face was just one of pure agony. And my gut just constricted. It was like this wave of compassion just hit me, because no one deserves to be out in weather like this. And I'm sure there's been times where you've seen the suffering of others, and you also have had this impulse in your heart to go out to them, right? It's no surprise that in Halifax, in our economy, a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet, and a lot of people are losing that struggle. Homelessness is on the rise. There's almost 1,000 registered homeless people in the HRM, which is a 50% increase in just 2 years. And that's just the ones that are registered. There's lots that aren't. Nova Scotia has the highest poverty rate in the country, with almost a third of people struggling to meet just their basic needs of life: food, shelter, electricity. And I'm sure you've also experienced this sense of compassion that you have when you know someone who's physically in pain, that either because of illness or injury, whether it's big or small, there's some kind of damage done to the body, and they're in pain. And because of the failures in our own medical system, the lack of doctors, a lot of people aren't able to reach the care that they need, and they're suffering, they're in pain, they're in desperate need of healing. So there's all this suffering going on that moves us with compassion when we see it. You've probably heard the phrase, "My heart goes out to you." Maybe you've heard it said to you, or maybe you've used it yourself. "My heart goes out to you." And there's something natural about that. There's something normal for a human being to see another human being in suffering, to have their heart move outwards, to go out to them. But sometimes this tendency, this feeling of compassion, we can let it remain just a feeling. We don't actually do anything with it. And this can happen for a lot of reasons. Maybe because we don't know how to help. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to actually stop the suffering of the other person. Maybe you've tried posting about it online, and you feel maybe a little bit better, but you know deep down, I didn't really help anyone, even though it feels like I did something. We can also be overwhelmed by all the suffering facing us. Homelessness, world hunger, all the people that are sick and suffering, and it's like, I don't know what to do. I'm not a doctor. I can't solve world hunger. What is one little person going to do in the face of all this suffering? I don't know what to do with this compassion. And even worse, sometimes we suppress that feeling of compassion Because we don't know what to do, because we feel like we can't help, it hurts too much to care, and so we try not to care at all. We push down that feeling of compassion, and a coldness or a hardness of heart can come where eventually we don't even see suffering at all. We try to turn a blind eye to it. But God gave us compassion. God gave us compassion, not just to experience it internally, but so that it would take us outside of ourselves so that we could go out in action to the other person. And of course, the model of this, par excellence, is Jesus himself. Jesus, who sees a man with leprosy, and it says that he was moved with pity. And the reason that Jesus was moved with pity is because lepers went through a tremendous amount of suffering in that society. We heard about that in the first reading, all the things that they were required to do. Not only did they have all the physical suffering, the oozing sores, the disfigurement and the scarring in their body, the fact that their extremities, their fingers, their toes, their nose would fall off, many of them would go blind. It was an almost certain death sentence to be a leper. But they also had to go through immense social suffering as well. They were not allowed to live in the city with everyone else. They were kicked out of society, completely ostracized from their families because of fear of contagion. They couldn't own a job. No one would hire a leper. They had no way to provide for themselves. They were homeless, sent out of the city to live in the wilderness and to live off of the charity, off of whatever scraps people left for them. And so this leper would have been very used to people chasing him away. The best he could expect from people is that they would just ignore him and try not to make any contact with him. And yet he comes to Jesus. And Jesus is different because it says, moved with compassion for the man, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. Jesus didn't let his compassion just remain internally. Jesus allowed his compassion to move him outwards, to stretch out his hand and touch this leper. Jesus' compassion moved him to action, to reach out to this man who was in suffering, to reach out to him, to love him, to touch him. And as a result, immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Imagine how amazing that would have been to see. Like the sores starting to close up, fresh skin growing over. Maybe fingers and toes starting to grow back. We have no idea how much an extent the leprosy this man had. But this man is healed instantaneously on the spot by the divine power of God being released from Jesus. And then, of course, Jesus was also providing for this man's physical needs, for his livelihood, because now this man could re-enter into society. Now this man could finally have a start at a normal life. Jesus gave him a fresh, new life. He helped him in so many ways with that simple touch of reaching out. And Jesus is the model then for us of how to use our compassion. Not to let it stay inward as a feeling that we just feel inside, but as something that motivates us to go out in action to love others, to help them in their suffering. You see, the compassion that you feel when you see others that are suffering, God gave that to you. It's not just so that you feel bad or guilty for no reason. No, it's designed to lead you outside of yourself, to move you into action, because compassion moves us to action. You are made in God's image. You're made in God's image. God created you in his image and in his likeness, which means that when you feel compassion, you're tapping into the heart of the God that made you. God also has this merciful, compassionate love for those who are suffering. You're tapping into his heart. You're connecting with your Creator. It's really profound in the fact that we're able to feel, that we're able to be connected to God in this way as image bearers of him. But when we read the scriptures sometimes, it doesn't match our experience of reality. Like, of course, when Jesus reaches out and touches someone, they're healed. He's Jesus. What do you expect? Right? He's the Son of God. Like, I'm not Jesus. I'm not the Son of God. So how am I supposed to let what happens in the scriptures impact my own life? Just last week, after Mass, one of the parishioners came up to me and he said, in the Bible we see the apostles, they have this power, like they're healing people, there's all these things happening. Why don't we see that same power in the church? And it's true, we don't see the same amount of healings that we do in the Bible. What's going on? Well, I want you to know that Jesus still has the power to heal people. Jesus is still healing people today, and I actually want to tell you the story of a pretty dramatic healing that I saw take place just a couple weeks ago. When all of us as Companions of the Cross were going to our study days in Detroit, one of our priests was there, and as I was walking to him in the hallway, I saw that there was something wrong with his face. He had all of these really gross scabs and growths all in his beard. That's not why I shaved my beard, by the way. Well, I saw him and I said, Father Galen, what happened to you? And he said that he had something called folliculitis. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of what folliculitis looks like. I'm not going to leave it up too much because some of you might be a little bit medically squeamish, but I'll show you a picture of it and I'll let you know Father Galen looked worse than this. So, this is what folliculitis looks like. It's this inflammation of the hair follicles, and it spreads in this horrible rash. It scabs up. It's really nasty. Father Simon, who was mentored by Father Galen, was a good friend of him. Father Galen had mentored him in the priesthood. The first thing Father Simon said when he saw him was, "Is that contagious?" Kind of staying back a little bit. Father Simon is a real paragon of compassion, But Father Galen had this on his face, and later in the week, we actually had this time where we were all praying with each other for healing. So all of us as brother priests, we paired up, we're praying with each other for various things that we needed healing from. And the next morning at breakfast, Father Galen comes down, and his face is completely clean. I said, Father Galen, what happened to you? And as if proving a point, he's like, we prayed for healing last night. I don't know if you remember. I'm like, yeah, oh yeah. He said, in the middle of the night, all of his scabs fell off. All of his wounds healed up. It was like an instantaneous healing. The next morning, he was completely fine. Now, he was no leper, but it was certainly a pretty serious skin condition that Jesus healed just a couple weeks ago. So Jesus is still healing people today. And here at the parish, we have a certain expectation for that. That's why at our Alpha nights, we often will pray with people for healing. At our parish missions, we'll often do the same. But we also have an understanding that God is not just calling us to heal people supernaturally, but to go and minister to those who are suffering on a more natural level, that we are called to go out into the world to serve those who are poor, who are hungry, who are homeless, who are abandoned. That's why we have our homeless shelters operating in the parking lot. That's why we have ministries like SBP Cares, and SBP Outreach, and our St. Vincent de Paul group that looks for and identifies needs in our community and actually goes to them and serves them with what they concretely need. That's why, as a parish, we decided to donate 10% of our ordinary income, to set aside 10% of our ordinary income in order to serve the poor. And last year, we gave away $122,621 to take care of the poor in our community. This is what God has already been doing in our parish. And it's amazing that God is moving us in compassion to pray with the sick for healing and to take care of those who are suffering, the poor. But we've been talking a lot about our bold new vision, right? This series 2033. And we don't want to just rejoice in all the amazing things that God has already done, but we want to look forward to the future to see, where does God want us to grow? How does God want to take us even further? And so again, this was our vision. St. Benedict Parish is an explosively alive faith community where people discover Jesus, become missionary disciples, and go out to transform the world. That's our mission. That is our vision of where we are called to go. And I want to focus on that part where it says, go out to transform the world. What does that really look like? Well, it means that every single person at our parish is moved with the compassionate heart that Jesus, the Son of God, had. That we would be called to let our compassion move us to action and to actually go out to help others, specifically in two ways. That we would go out to pray with people for healing, and that we would go out to serve the poor. That we would allow our compassion to take us out in these ways to go out and transform the world. To go out and pray for healing. You might be thinking, me? I don't know if I'm equipped for that. I don't even know what I would say. Well, one of the last things that Jesus told us to do before he ascended into heaven was to lay our hands on the sick and see them be cured. Right before he ascended to heaven, Jesus said, "These signs will accompany those who believe in my name." And he lists off all the things that they're going to do. He says, they will lay their hands on the sick and they will recover. Now notice about that, he doesn't say these signs will accompany those who are priests. He doesn't say these signs will accompany those who work for the church. He doesn't say these signs will accompany professional Christians who know what they're doing. He said these signs will accompany those who believe. So guess what? If you believe in Jesus, this applies to you. You're called to lay your hands on the sick and see them recover. Jesus healed that leper today out of compassion for him. But he wasn't just doing it for him. He was showing us as a model, as an example for how we are to act. As Christians, we're like little Christs, little anointed ones. And we're called to imitate Jesus, to follow after him, to do what he did. But we're also called to imitate Jesus in his love and his preference for the poor, for the abandoned, for the ones that are on the margins of the society, for the ones that everyone else would say, they don't really matter. They don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Jesus has a preference for them. He has a compassionate love for them, and we have to model ourselves after him in that as well. To go out and serve the poor with acts of mercy, looking to Jesus as our example. Our SBP Cares ministry is always in need of help to make sure that the people in our community are being taken care of. People that we need to make meals for our shelter guests. There are so many different needs, and we need your gifts, your talents, your wisdom, your finances to be able to help those in our community that are suffering the most. What would it look like in our parish by the year 2033 if we were fully embracing this bold new vision? What would it look like? Well, I think every single parishioner would be tapped into the merciful heart of God. That our compassion wouldn't just be a feeling inside, but that it would move us to go out in action. That we would be hearing constant testimonies of people that had experienced physical healing at our parish because someone here prayed with them. That we wouldn't just say, when someone tells us how suffering they are, I'll pray for you. But instead we would say, do you mind if I pray with you right now? Can I put my hand on your shoulder and just say a quick prayer? That it would be a culture change where we would be used to this. That we would be praying with people even outside the church, with our friends, with our family, even strangers you meet. If you go into a coffee shop, you see someone with crutches and you're like, hey, I'm a Catholic. One of the things we do is we pray with people for healing. Is it okay if I do that right now? Why not? Why not see the dramatic healings that Jesus saw? He told us to do it, so let's do it. What would it look like if everyone in our community was known for our acts of mercy for the poor? That when people thought of St. Benedict Parish, they thought, that's a parish that really serves the community, that really takes care of people, that really moves outward to help people that are in need. What if we had the team, the money, the resources, the strategies to take care of many more people than we currently are? What if we never had to turn anyone away, but everyone who came could be served and helped and reintroduced to life through the ministry that we offer here? What if people were so touched by our compassionate care for others, that they would be curious to hear about this Jesus guy that we claim to follow. This Jesus who, by his grace, that's the only reason we're able to do any of this in the first place. That other churches in our province, in our country, would be inspired by our example and would also seek to provide a special preferential treatment for those who are poor, as Jesus commanded us to do. This is what can happen. When moved by compassion, we go out to transform the world.